My son sealed his fate with 11 words. It was a Tuesday, 9 days after the wedding I'd paid for. A cold rain was slicking the streets of downtown Greenwich, making the lights of the Michelin-star restaurant bleed across the asphalt. I was sitting in my Ford F-150, the engine off, the smell of old leather and sawdust a familiar comfort. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched the happy couple emerge with their parents. Laughter, air kisses, the flash of Madison's new diamond earrings. My boy, Ethan, looked like he'd been born in his $1,000 suit. He never looked that comfortable in the work boots I'd bought him for his 16th birthday. My phone buzzed. It was him. I answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice was thin, distant, rehearsed. "Ethan." A pause. I could hear the city traffic, the clink of glasses from the valet stand. He was getting his courage up. Or, more likely, he was reading from script Madison had written for him. "Listen, about the reception at the club this Saturday." He took a breath. "Dad, you don't need to come." There it was. The first 7 words were the setup. The next 4 were the punch. You wouldn't fit in." A quiet click. He'd hung up. 11 words. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't feel a single tear threaten to form. The grief I should have felt had been replaced by something else, something cold and heavy and perfectly clear. It settled in my bones like winter. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel. They were contractor's hands. Thick, calloused, with faint white scars crisscrossing the knuckles from a lifetime of slipped wrenches and splintered 2x4s. These were the hands that had built a business from nothing. The hands that had signed a check for $90,000 so my son could have ice sculptures and a string quartet, so he could marry into a family that measured a man's worth by the label on his suit, not the strength of his spine. They thought I was just a simple man, a relic, a broken-down old builder in a dusty truck, good for a handout and then to be swept neatly out of sight. They saw the flannel shirt and the worn-out jeans, and they stopped looking. They never thought to ask what I did before I started building houses. They never wondered how a simple contractor afforded to send his son to Wharton. People like the Davenports, the old-money aristocrats of the world, live in a fortress of assumptions. And their greatest assumption is that the man who pours the concrete could never be the one to bring the whole fortress down. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile my foremen see right before I tell them to tear down a wall that's a 1/4 inch out of true. It's a smile that means a lesson is about to be taught. An expensive one. I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, a low growl that matched the feeling in my chest. "All right, son," I said to the empty cab. "Class is in session." 2 weeks earlier, I was standing on the manicured lawn of a Westchester estate that cost more than all the houses on my childhood block combined. $90,000 buys a lot of pretty lies. It buys 500 chairs draped in white linen, towers of glistening shrimp, and a champagne fountain that burbled like a brook. It buys a 10-piece band playing Sinatra and a photographer who calls everyone darling. What it doesn't buy is warmth or honesty. I felt like an intruder at my own son's wedding. My suit, the best I owned, felt like a costume. My tie felt like a noose. I was surrounded by men with soft hands and predatory smiles, their wives thin as reeds and dripping with diamonds. They all had the same look in their eyes when they glanced at me, a brief, dismissive flicker that sized me up, categorized me as other, and moved on. I was Ethan's blue-collar father, the quaint, embarrassing origin story my son was so desperate to escape. I watched him across the lawn. He was laughing, a bright, brittle sound, as Madison's father, Charles Davenport, held court. Charles was the king of this little universe. A private equity ghoul with a mane of silver hair and a handshake like a dead fish. He'd shaken my hand earlier, a limp, perfunctory gesture, his eyes already scanning the crowd for someone more important. "Frank," he'd said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Good of you to contribute." Contribute. That's what he called it, as if I'd chipped in for a pizza. I tried to catch Ethan's eye, but he was a ghost. He'd glide past, a champagne flute in hand, with a quick, "Hey, Dad, having a good time?" before being swept away by Madison or one of her identically perfect bridesmaids. He wasn't my son that day. He was an actor playing a part, and he was terrified of his old man forgetting his lines and revealing the whole thing was a sham. Madison was a masterpiece of cold perfection, a porcelain doll with quartz for a heart. She moved through the party with a serene smile that never reached her eyes. She called me Frank too, not Dad. When she'd hug me after the ceremony, it was a stiff, arm's-length affair, careful not to wrinkle her dress or get too close to the man who smelled faintly of sawdust and honesty. I found a spot near a massive oak tree at the edge of the reception, nursing a bourbon, and just watched. A good builder doesn't just look at a structure. He sees the load-bearing walls, the stress points, the hidden weaknesses in the foundation. And this family, this whole world, was a poorly constructed house of cards. I saw the way Charles's partners looked at him when he wasn't watching, not with respect, but with the keen appraisal of circling sharks. I saw the way Madison's mother downed her Chardonnay, her smile growing tighter with every glass. I saw the desperate hunger in Ethan's eyes, the need for approval, the terror of being found unworthy. He wasn't marrying a woman. He was marrying a zip code, a country club membership, a brand. He was trading his soul for a stock portfolio. Later that evening, as the band played a soulless version of some pop song, I saw Ethan and Charles standing by the cigar bar. Charles had his hand on my son's shoulder, a gesture that looked more like ownership than affection. He was talking, and Ethan was nodding, his face a mask of rapt attention. I was too far away to hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew that kind of talk. It's the talk of masters and apprentices, of kings and courtiers. It was the moment the deed was officially transferred. My son was no longer mine. He was theirs. I finished my bourbon, the ice clinking in the empty glass. I felt no anger, no sadness, just a profound, tectonic shift deep inside me. For 28 years, I had built a wall of protection around my son. I had worked until my hands bled to give him a life I never had, to make sure he never had to struggle the way I did. And in doing so, I had failed him completely. I'd given him a life without struggle and created a man with no strength. I set the empty glass down on a passing tray, gave a polite nod to a stranger, and walked away from the music and the fake laughter. I didn't say goodbye. No one noticed I was gone. As I drove my truck down the long, winding driveway, away from the glittering mansion, I knew what I had to do. You can't fix a rotten foundation. You have to tear the whole damn thing down and start over. My house isn't like the mansions in Westchester. It doesn't announce itself. It's a simple, two-story colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street in a town where people still know their neighbors. I built it myself 30 years ago with my wife, Sarah. She picked the layout from a magazine, and I made it real. Every nail, every board, every wire tucked behind the drywall was put there by my own two hands. Sarah's been gone for 5 years now. Cancer. It was fast, and it was cruel. The silence she left behind is the loudest thing in the house. But her presence is still here. In the garden she planted out back, in a worn spot on the armchair where she used to read, in the smell of lavender that still clings to the linen closet. After she died, I threw myself into my work. Frank's Construction. It's not a big company. I have a dozen guys, good men, most of whom have been with me for over a decade. We don't build skyscrapers or flashy glass condos. We build houses meant to last. We reinforce foundations, restore historic homes, and build additions for growing families. It's real work, tangible. At the end of the day, you can stand back, wipe the sweat from your brow, and see what you've accomplished. You can touch it. It has weight. It has meaning. My sanctuary is the workshop out back. It's a converted 2-car garage, filled with the comforting scent of cedar and machine oil. The walls are lined with tools, each one clean, sharp, and in its proper place. Saws, planers, drills, levels. To me, they're not just tools for building things. They're tools for solving problems. There isn't a challenge in the world that can't be understood through the lens of construction. You assess the situation, you draw up a blueprint, you gather your materials, and you execute. Step by step, patiently, precisely. Sarah and I, we had one dream for Ethan. We didn't care if he was a doctor, a lawyer, or a carpenter. We just wanted him to be a good man, an honest man, someone who understood the value of a hard day's work and the integrity of a promise. We wanted him to have my strength and his mother's kindness. Somewhere along the way, The blueprint went wrong. I see that now. I saw his ambition, his intelligence, and I thought the best way to support him was to clear his path. I paid for the best schools, the tutors, the trips abroad. I made sure he never had to worry about money, that he could focus entirely on climbing the ladder. I thought I was giving him a gift. Instead, I had deprived him of the one thing that forges a man's character: resistance. You don't get strong by lifting feathers. You get strong by lifting iron. He grew to see my world, the world of calloused hands and honest labor, as something to be ashamed of. A primitive starting point he had transcended. He saw my simple life not as a choice, but as a limitation. He couldn't understand that I could have had that other life, the life of suits and boardrooms, and I had walked away from it, willingly, because I knew what it cost. The night after the phone call, I sat in my workshop until the early hours of the morning. The house was quiet. I wasn't planning. Not yet. I was remembering the boy who used to follow me around job sites, his face smudged with dirt, asking a million questions. The boy who was proud of his dad. I looked at a framed photo on my workbench. It's of Sarah and a 5-year-old Ethan, building a lopsided sandcastle on a beach in Montauk. They're both laughing, covered in sand. Happy. I ran a thumb over the dusty glass. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a messy, emotional act. This was about restoration, correction. I had built my son on a faulty foundation, and the structure was about to collapse. A good builder doesn't just walk away. He shores up what can be saved and tears down what can't. And sometimes, before you can build something new, you have to clear the site completely. My real office isn't the cluttered room in the back of the construction yard where I sign invoices and go over blueprints. The real office is in my basement, behind a steel-reinforced door that looks like it belongs to a walk-in freezer. Inside, there are no family photos. No folksy moment of vida. The walls are soundproofed. The air is cool and still. There's a single desk, a chair, and a piece of equipment that looks like an old, heavy-duty landline phone from the 90s. It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone, a relic from a past life. I hadn't used it in almost a decade. I sat down, the worn leather of the chair groaning in the silence. For a moment, I hesitated. Making this call was like opening a door I had bolted shut long ago. I had come to this quiet life to escape the world that phone represented, a world of whispers, of leveraged secrets, of problems that were made to disappear in the dead of night. It was a world where I wasn't Frank the contractor. I was someone else, a specialist, a man people came to when they had a problem that couldn't be solved with money or lawyers. I was the architect of solutions, the kind of solutions that were never written down. I took a deep breath, the scent of concrete and cold steel filling my lungs, and dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. It's been a while, a voice said. No name, no greeting, just a calm, even tone I remembered as clearly as my own. Julian, I said. I was beginning to think you'd lost my number, or died. I wasn't sure which was more likely. There was a hint of dry amusement in his voice. Julian was a ghost, a concierge for a very select clientele. He was the man who knew how to find things, information, people, vulnerabilities. I need a blueprint, Julian, on a man named Charles Davenport. Private equity. Greenwich. Davenport, Julian repeated, the name already being processed by whatever vast, invisible network he controlled. Old money. New ruthlessness. Anything in particular, or should I just get you the usual architectural, structural, and geological survey? It was our old code. Architectural, public records, financials, business dealings. Structural, personal life, family, relationships, hidden vices. Geological, the deep buried secrets. The things that could cause a seismic event if they ever saw the light of day. All of it, I said. Start with the foundation. I want to know about every deal he's ever made, especially the ones on the edge of the law. I want to know where he parks his money, who he talks to, and what he's afraid of. And I want it yesterday. That's the Frank I remember, Julian said. Consider it done. Anything else? Yes. A name. Marcus Thorne. Apex Capital. There was a moment of silence on the other end. A different kind of silence. Respectful. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a big fish. He was a leviathan, a titan of Wall Street. Thorn, Julian said slowly. That's a deep well, Frank. I know. I help him dig it. I don't need a file on him. I just need you to arrange a quiet audit, a stress test, on a new acquisition of his. A young man named Ethan. Your boy? Julian asked. There was no judgment in his voice, only clarification. My son, I corrected him. The distinction was important. He worked for Thorn. I need a clear picture of his role, his projects, his performance. Everything. But it has to be invisible. A ghost passing through the server room. Marcus can't know I'm looking. Understood, Julian said. The fatherly concern package. It'll be on your secure server by morning. Is that all? That's it, I said. It's good to hear your voice, Julian. You too, Frank. Try not to wait another decade for the next call. He hung up. I sat there in the cold, silent room, the receiver still in my hand. It felt heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just out of practice. I had told myself I was done with this life, that I had buried that part of me for good. But you can't bury who you are. Not really. You just pour a concrete slab over the top and hope it holds. And now, the foundation of my own life was cracking. The old instincts, the old skills, the cold, clear-eyed calculus of cause and effect. It was all coming back. And it felt like coming home. The next morning, Julian's report was waiting for me. It was a masterclass in quiet efficiency. A complete breakdown of my son's professional life. His projects, his performance reviews, even transcripts of his water cooler conversations. Ethan was, as I suspected, a mid-level analyst on a team managing a portfolio of tech startups. He was competent, but not brilliant. He was riding the wave, a well-educated cog in a vast, money-making machine. His career was a straight, predictable line, aiming for a cushy vice presidency in 5 years. A life of comfort, insulated from failure. It was time to introduce a little turbulence. I waited until 11 a.m., when I knew the morning chaos on the trading floor would have subsided. I used a clean burner phone, dialing a number that wasn't listed in any directory on Earth. It was Marcus Thorn's private line. He picked up on the first ring. Yeah. His voice was a low growl, impatient. Marcus, it's Frank. The change on the other end of the line was instantaneous. The impatience vanished, replaced by a tone I hadn't heard from him in 20 years. It was the sound of a man who suddenly remembered a debt he thought had been long forgotten. Frank, he said, his voice now smooth as silk. My God, it's been an age. How are you? Are you good? I'm good, Marcus. Still building things, I said. Listen, I won't take much of your time. I'm calling about a favor. Anything, he said immediately. No hosetaschen. You know that. Anything. What do you need? Someone gone? Someone found. Nothing that dramatic, I said, a faint smile on my lips. It was funny how they always went back to the old days. It's about my son. Ethan. He works for you. Ethan. Of course. Bright kid. Great school. He's on the Ellison Tech portfolio, right? Good team. He's on the right track. That's the problem, Marcus. The track is too straight. Too easy. The boy's gotten soft. He's forgotten where he comes from. He needs a challenge. Something to remind him what the world looks like outside of a Manhattan high-rise. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Marcus was smart. He knew this wasn't just a concerned father talking. This was a request, wrapped in a friendly warning. I see, he said slowly, the gears in his formidable brain turning. A character-building opportunity. Exactly, I said. I was looking at your portfolio. That old steel mill you acquired in Ohio. Rusted out, union problems, bleeding money. A real son of a bitch of a project. Starkweather Steel, Marcus sighed. My one bad bet last year. It's a graveyard. We're going to write it off, break it up for scrap. Don't, I said. Give it to my son. Give him the whole thing. Tell him it's a unique opportunity to prove himself. A chance to turn around a legacy asset. Tell him if he succeeds, he'll be a legend. Put him in charge of the restructuring. Send him out to live there. Let him get his hands dirty. Let him fail. Marcus was silent for a long time. I could almost hear him calculating the angles. He was being asked to take a promising, if unremarkable, analyst and exile him to a career-killing dead end. But he was also being given a chance to repay a debt to a man he never, ever wanted to be on the wrong side of. A man who knew that the official story of how Apex Capital survived the 2008 crisis and the unofficial story were two very different things. A man who had been in Zurich on a cold November night when Marcus's entire world was about to implode. "Understand," Marcus said finally. His voice was all business now. A real-world education. "Consider it done, Frank. I'll call him into my office this afternoon. He'll be on a plane to Ohio by Monday." "I appreciate it, Marcus." "Don't mention it," he said, and I could hear the genuine relief in his voice. This was an easy price to pay. Anything for a friend. "And Frank, it's good to hear you're still around." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and hung up. I walked out of my basement office and into the bright sunlight of my workshop. I picked up a piece of rough-sawn oak, feeling its weight, its texture. Stage one was complete. I had taken my son's carefully constructed career and placed it on a foundation of sand, right before the tide came in. He wouldn't see it as a lesson. He would see it as a betrayal, as a catastrophe. Good. Let him. The first step in learning how to build is understanding what it feels like when things fall apart. The phone call came at 6 p.m. that evening. I was in my kitchen, making myself a simple dinner of steak and potatoes. I let it ring 5 times before picking up. "What did you do?" Ethan's voice was a raw scream, stripped of all its polished, Wharton-educated composure. I could hear Madison crying, or more accurately, shrieking, in the background. I calmly placed my fork on the plate. "I have no idea what you're talking about, son. Is something wrong?" "Something wrong?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "I just came from a meeting with Marcus Thorne." "Marcus Thorne? He's sending me to some dying hellhole in Ohio to run a rust bucket steel mill. He called it a unique opportunity. My career is over." "Over? Ohio is a fine state, Ethan. Your grandmother was from Cleveland." "I don't care about grandma," he shrieked. "This is my life. Madison she's a wreck. We just got married. We're supposed to be building a life here, in New York, not in some shack surrounded by unemployed steelworkers." I took a slow bite of my steak. It was cooked perfectly, medium rare. "Well, son," I said, chewing thoughtfully, "that sounds like a tough break. But you're a smart kid. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Marcus Thorne is a big deal. If he thinks this is a good opportunity for you, maybe you should listen." "A good opportunity? Dad, this is a punishment. It's a career graveyard. Someone did this to me. Someone sabotaged me." I could hear the gears turning in his head, the paranoia and disbelief churning into a furious, misplaced certainty. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're the only one who would be jealous enough to do something like this. You hate that I'm successful. You hate that I married Madison." I sighed a long, weary sound I'd practiced for years. It was the sigh of a simple man confronted with a world too complex for him to understand. "Ethan," I said, my voice full of feigned hurt and confusion. "That's a terrible thing to say. I'm a contractor. I build houses. What kind of influence do you think I have with a billionaire like Marcus Thorne? I've never even met the man. Maybe you just weren't as good at your job as you thought you were." That was the kill shot. The one thing his fragile ego couldn't handle. The suggestion that this wasn't the result of some grand conspiracy, but a simple consequence of his own inadequacy. There was a strangled sound on the other end of the line, a mix of rage and pure, wounded pride. "I hate you," he spat. "You hear me? I wish you were dead." He slammed the phone down. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. The words didn't hurt. They were just noise. The desperate flailing of a boy who had just been thrown into the deep end of the pool for the first time in his life and was shocked to discover the water was cold. Madison would be fanning the flames, of course. She hadn't married a project manager for a failing steel mill in the Rust Belt. She had married a ticket to the top of Manhattan society. This new reality would be an intolerable stain on her perfect life. Their perfect, fragile, Crystal Palace had just sustained its first crack. I finished my dinner, washed my plate, and put it away in the drying rack. It was a good start, but exiling the prince was only the first step. Now it was time to go after the king. Julian's file on Charles Davenport was thick, detailed, and utterly damning. It was a monument to a lifetime of greed, shortcuts, and a deep-seated belief that the rules were for other people. Most of it was the usual filth: leveraged buyouts that gutted companies and left thousands unemployed, shady political donations, a well-hidden mistress in Geneva. It was all useful, but it wasn't elegant. It was a sledgehammer, and I needed a scalpel. Then I found it, buried deep in a subfolder labeled offshore entities. It was a deal from 3 years ago. A Cayman Islands shell corporation, a suspiciously undervalued acquisition of a biotech firm, and a payout that was routed through 3 different countries before vanishing into a private fund controlled by, on paper, a third cousin of Charles's wife. It wasn't technically illegal. It was just smelly. It was the kind of deal that, if exposed to sunlight, would attract the attention of regulators like flies to rotting meat. The SEC, the IRS, they lived for this kind of ambiguity. The beauty of it was that Julian hadn't found a smoking gun. He'd found a map that led to where the gun might be buried. There was no direct evidence linking Charles to the final payout, just a web of connections that was too intricate to be a coincidence. Perfect. An accusation is loud and messy. An insinuation, planted in the right soil, can grow into a forest of doubt. I didn't go to the New York Times. I didn't go to the SEC. That would be too direct, too traceable. Instead, I used another of my old contacts, a man named Peterson who ran a small, highly respected, and deeply cynical financial newsletter called The Vulture's Beak. It was read by everyone who mattered on Wall Street, precisely because it never pulled its punches and was meticulously researched. Peterson was a former investigative journalist who hated the rich, but loved their secrets even more. I composed a simple, anonymous email from an encrypted address. It contained no accusations, just a single scanned document, a transfer order from the Cayman Shell Corp to the first holding company in Panama. And one sentence. Might be interesting to see who really benefited from the sale of Biogen Therapeutics. That was it. A breadcrumb. A loose thread. I knew Peterson. He wouldn't be able to resist pulling it. He was a bloodhound, and I had just given him the scent. I hit send and shut down the computer. Now all I had to do was wait. In the world of construction, you learn patience. You pour the concrete for the foundation, and then you have to wait for it to cure. You can't rush it. If you build on it too soon, the whole structure will be compromised. Charles Davenport's reputation was his entire foundation, and I had just poured a fast-acting, corrosive acid right into the concrete mix. All I had to do was wait and listen for the cracks. It took 10 days. The mention wasn't on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It was a small, 2-paragraph piece buried on page 6 of Peterson's newsletter, under the headline, Caribbean Shadows Over Davenport Equity. It was a work of art. Peterson didn't make a single direct accusation. He just asked questions. He laid out the timeline of the Biogen deal, pointed out the unusually low sale price, and noted the intricate web of offshore accounts the money had passed through. He ended the piece with a single, devastating sentence. While no wrongdoing is suggested, the deal's structure raises complex questions about transparency that investors and regulators alike may find compelling. It was the financial equivalent of someone whispering fire in a crowded theater. To an outsider, it meant nothing. But in Charles Davenport's world, the world of exclusive country clubs, hushed boardroom meetings, and multi-billion-dollar funds, reputation is the only currency that matters. And that little paragraph was like a drop of poison in the well. I didn't have to imagine the fallout. Julian sent me a summary. The first calls to Charles's office started an hour after the newsletter went out. Concerned investors. Just checking in, Charles. Saw that strange little piece. Probably nothing, eh? Then came the silence. The lunch invitation that was quietly rescinded. The golf game on Saturday that was suddenly canceled due to a family matter. The real damage was done in the places I couldn't see, but knew were there. The hushed conversations in the steam room at the Greenwich Club. The raised eyebrows between partners over a glass of scotch. Did you see the piece on Charles? Always knew he was a bit too slick. Where there's smoke. Charles Davenport had built his career on an image of untouchable, old money infallibility. That image was now tarnished. He was no longer a safe bet. He was a risk. A man with questions surrounding him. He would be lashing out, of course, blaming his rivals, his competitors. He'd be hiring lawyers and private investigators to find the source of a leak. He would be turning his world upside down, looking for an enemy he could understand, a fellow predator in a suit. He would never, in a million years, think to look at the quiet man in the dusty Ford pickup, the man whose son he had helped cast aside, the man who had poured the foundation for the club, where he was now being ostracized. He was a man under siege, and he didn't even know who was holding the gun. The paranoia would be eating him alive. It's hard to project an aura of power when you're constantly looking over your shoulder. His fortress was beginning to crumble, not from a frontal assault, but from a whisper, from a single, well-placed crack in the foundation that was now spreading silently, unstoppably, through everything he had ever built.